Sharon Leishman with the Duwamish Alive on Rainier Avenue Radio, and we're introducing our new program about the Duwamish River and the watershed and all the communities within it. And we're just very excited. For our first guest for the show is Alicia Kellogg, who is with King County. She is the Duwamish Basin Steward, and she's going to talk a little bit about what that position is. So first, Alicia, why don't you introduce yourself a bit, your background, and what y'all do?
Yeah, absolutely. The title Basin Steward is a little generic. It could mean a lot of different things, but in this case, the Basin Steward program at King County is all about, it can mean conservation, it can mean salmon recovery, depending on the basin that you're in and what that basin's challenges are. For me, in the Duwamish Basin, I am all salmon recovery forward. So what that means is I am always looking for opportunities to develop and enhance and fund projects that are going to support salmon recovery. Often that means things that are a little bit outside the box. In another basin, that might be a massive capital restoration project right on the river. But in the Duwamish Basin, the opportunities to do things like that don't really exist. So I'm looking at things that maybe are a little bit uphill, like a green stormwater infrastructure. I'm looking at things that are on a smaller scale, like creeks and tributaries. But just trying to get creative and figure out ways that we can help our little salmon friends on the Duwamish.
Yeah, and I'd have to say this area, the Duwamish watershed, 100 years ago, it was basically a huge delta that was just teeming with a lot of wildlife, oysters, shellfish, and all. And the hills were, they were old growth forests. I mean, this was just a little over 100 years ago. And, we've seen a lot of changes when you look at it now. And I'm told that our natural areas are less than 1% of what they used to be. And I know, your position's really unique because you work with so many different entities. And like I said in our previous program, this watershed is a huge and diverse ecosystem. And when I say ecosystem, I include our communities, which really give it this incredible vibrancy as well. And again, most people don't know that, the river, Duwamish River, is Tukwila and Seattle's only river. So it's pretty significant. And, you've been working with so many different businesses and community groups and nonprofits. How do you see this urbanization that's occurred over 100 years kind of impacting not only the river, but this whole watershed ecosystem? I know that's a big question to unpack.
No, that's great. That's great. And I think, one of the challenges unique to the Duwamish Basin is that it is so jurisdictionally complex. We are looking at Seattle, we are looking at Tukwila, unincorporated King County, and even a little bit of Burien and SeaTac if you really are talking about the entire watershed outline. When it comes to urbanization, because this is a river that's the only river in Seattle, the only river in Tukwila, there's the urbanization pressures on this river are high. Like you said, the river used to be wide and meandering and unconstrained prior to European settlement. And then once European settlers came, it was highly constrained. It was channelized and essentially, in some ways, really stripped of its identity as a river. And you can see that still today as an artifact when you look at a map and you see it written as Duwamish Waterway in the lower Duwamish. Additionally, for many years, many decades, the river was essentially used for sewage instead of being allowed to do its own thing as a river. So a river, if it is in its ideal conditions, a river will not be constrained and it will be allowed to move around. It will be allowed to flood. And the things that we did when European settlers moved in and really constrained the river and polluted it have had massive impacts on it. The good news is that there's been a little bit of a sea change in the last few decades in terms of people's understanding of the benefit of restoring natural processes back into cities and to the parts of cities that still have nature in them, which is really wonderful. And it's helped shepherd in kind of this new wave of funding and new wave of projects. And if you ask folks today what their biggest priorities are about the river, they're not just saying things like, flooding, I don't want it to damage me or hurt me. They're saying, I want it to also be good habitat for the wildlife. I want the salmon population to be restored. So people are understanding that we're all connected. It often seems it's very easy to think about when you live in a city that we are separate from nature and nature is adjacent to us. But the reality is we're all the same. We are nature, nature is us, and you really can't divorce the two as much as it is easy to think that way.
Yeah. And, I think it's really interesting that you brought up the flooding because especially in South Park, that is a really big deal now with climate change and the river has tidal flow to it. So there's a lot of elements that are really impacting all the businesses and communities that live, in the valley, in the Basin area. And it's interesting to me that we're now starting to look at letting the river run a bit wilder up in the upper reaches in the green section, to use kind of that nature's flow, to answer and be a solution to the flooding that's happening below in the Duwamish.
Absolutely. I mean, there was a long period of time where we believed, this obviously is very much tied in with the backgrounds of Seattle and the way that we believed we could just engineer away any kind of issues, whether it's sloughing off the hillsides into Elliott Bay or it's creating the locks. I think for a long time, we just believed that rivers were basically just wet roads and we could treat them as just a road that we were shipping things down, really diminishing what its value is as an ecological facet, an ecological unit. And I think we're starting to get back there a little bit. I think people appreciate it more and they're starting to understand that there's a lot of value to a river outside of its ability to transport things.
Yeah. It's really working with nature to help solve some of the problems that we're experiencing now, which I think is such a huge step forward for everybody. Absolutely. Definitely. So I know that there's been a ton of work cleaning up and restoring the Duwamish. What are the recent environmental wins that you've seen? Because to me, when they say this is the river of hope, you have to look at where we were maybe, in the 1970s, 1960s to where we are now. It's changed a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of good news, a lot of really cool things that have been happening, particularly in the last 2 decades. Since multiple Superfund sites were declared on the Duwamish, it took a long time to get here, but the cleanup has already started, which is incredible. The upper reach is already completed, and the cleanup will continue through the rest of the decade, followed by many, many, many years of monitoring. And I think I read somewhere that it's going to reduce pollution by something like 90%, which is incredible. We don't want a toxic river running through the city. In addition, there have been some really truly groundbreaking environmental projects that have taken place, and it's accelerating in pace. So, 15 years ago, we had North Wind's Weir, which is a really beautiful project in Tukwila. But since then, we've seen Duwamish Gardens. We've seen the Duwamish River People's Park, which is, I think, the largest restored habitat on the Duwamish River. It's just absolutely incredible. And then we have Chinook Wind, which is another massive mitigation site on the Duwamish. And some of these projects have the work that it's taken to get them to be constructed is immense because of that jurisdictional complexity. It's taken a lot of partnership. Right now, I'm looking at trying to do some work at Cecil Moses Park, and that is a park that is a King County park in the city of Tukwila, next to a state highway with city of Seattle utilities running through it. And it's also an inventoried flood control district asset. So
complexity it's at the max.
I know. And people say, well, how do you do that?
You're still smiling.
I don't know. I mean, I just have to call people and ask. I have no idea. There's no guidebook, so it's a lot of work. I've got my work cut out for me. But ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that people are working together more than ever before. They're finding ways to work together, even though in a lot of ways, jurisdictions are really not set up to work with each other, and figuring out ways to get certain bodies to bend and flex so that we can do some of these projects. I think it's really incredible. And additionally, there's the new Mouth of the Duwamish CSO project that's getting underway, which is huge.
So tell us a little bit, because I think, for our listeners, some of these terms are not terms I had to become familiar with. So CSO.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So CSO. So in cities that are older, that were established much, not in the last 50 years, say, they were established with a combined sewage system, which means that our stormwater and our sewage all flow through the same pipes, which means that during a storm event, when there's a heavy flow of water all of a sudden, if those combined sewage pipes are, if their capacity is exceeded because of that rain event, then that combined stormwater and sewage will outfall into the Puget Sound, which means that there's raw sewage flowing into the Puget Sound, into our natural bodies of water. It's icky. And we are under a consent decree to reduce the number of events that happen yearly. And one of the ways that we're working on that is by trying to combine the treatment of these known 5 CSOs at the mouth of the Duwamish. And we're trying to combine them in a way that we can capture them during these high rain events, treat that water, and stop this outflow of sewage into the Puget Sound.
It's basically saying that this is a tremendous effort to reduce the amount of pollution going into the water, which is huge. It's huge. And the other thing I wanted to just backtrack a little bit on is that you're mentioning a lot of these projects. Well, these projects, yes, in technical terms, they're a project, but they all really are bringing nature back to the river, and that those natural areas then become, valuable habitat for our salmon, for yes, we love beavers, and all the other wildlife that lives in this ecosystem. So, when Alicia, when you're talking about these, all the work that you've been doing, it really is bottom line about bringing life back into this wonderful river of ours.
Absolutely. And I think that there's, when we talk about restoration and what that looks like, I don't think anyone here is under the impression that the river is ever going to return back to the way it was pre-European settlers. And there's still a lot of room for improvement. So when we think about what can restoration look like, it might not be removing all the businesses and letting the river flow into that floodplain, but it might look like taking out a bulkhead, and instead of having a wall there, now we're going to gently slope that edge back, and we're going to plant native plants. We're going to create shade that's going to help keep the river cooler. We're going to provide places for the baby salmon to rest and to hide from predators. We're going to, that's going to filter some of the stormwater that comes into the river, and really trying to, bring forward the elements that we know are going to benefit the animals, even if it's on a smaller scale than just returning it to how it once was, which is never going to happen. Being really pragmatic about what we can do, even if it's just little things.
Yeah. And I think those little things, because what I love about your position is that you're a watershed wide position. You're not just focused on the riverbanks or the river. And so to me, what I love what you do is that you're going out and talking to businesses that are nowhere near the river, but that stormwater that flows from their property goes into the river. And I think that's true of all of us with our backyards and our front yards and the choices we make every day. They all affect the health of the river and everything that lives in it. So, I mean, I have to say, your conversations must be so interesting.
Yeah, it's funny as well. First of all, I probably should back up, but I'd be remiss in not mentioning that my position is funded by King County and the Port of Seattle and the City of Seattle and the City of Tukwila, which is kind of this unprecedented partnership to bring my role into being. And my position didn't used to exist until I started it a couple of years ago. And I think that speaks to kind of the willingness for people to collaborate more across jurisdictions. And one of the things that happens is that I go out and talk to folks, and people are far more educated about salmon than anyone has a right to be. And I think part of that's our education system. I certainly remember learning about the life cycle of salmon. I went to grew up around Renton. I went to the Kent School District. But people understand what it takes to keep salmon populations healthy. They value that, and they want to know more. They want to know what they can do. They want to know what they can be asking their representatives for. People are interested and they're motivated, even of all the different things that you could be focused on and worried about. People still care about it, which is really cool. It's very it helps me stay optimistic, I think.
And so, why do you think? Why are salmon so important to the ecosystem?
Oh my gosh! Well, I always like to say,
in a nutshell.
I always like to say, if you don't love salmon, it's because you don't know enough about salmon. And in a lot of ways, they are the canary in the coal mine, a keystone species and an indicator species, because sometimes you don't know that there might be water quality issues unless a salmon indicates it to you, because they are very sensitive. In some ways, that sensitivity works against them, because it means that as soon as one of the elements in their habitat is out of whack, then their population becomes threatened. But in other ways, it shows us that we need to make some changes. And if you look at, I don't want to get too far down the road of the adult Chinook mortality, pre-spawn mortality, but when we identify issues with salmon populations, that helps uncover issues with the whole ecosystem. So that's one aspect. Culturally and just to the indigenous communities in this area, and historically, salmon are a keystone part of that history. It was the primary staple of people's diets. And I personally love eating salmon, and I get it. And I think that is not lost on people, especially as we, as a culture, start to become more connected with our indigenous communities from the past and into the present.
Yeah. And I would say a lot of the things that we love about the Pacific Northwest, those, the bald eagles and the osprey, and I love those little river otters, and even the orca. I mean, all of those are dependent upon salmon. So they're, when you say they are keystone, they really are that really vital link in so much. Even I love it when Ken Workman of the Duwamish tribe talks about how these salmon the DNA is found in the trees. So,
absolutely. Yeah. Salmon are a really important source of what's called marine derived nutrients. So because they're anadromous, which is just a fancy way of saying that they're born in freshwater and they swim out to saltwater and they come back, they are bringing in all these nutrients from the ocean that would otherwise not make it up into the freshwater system, which is very cool. They spawn and then they die, and then their bodies basically become this fertilizer for all the plants around them. It's just incredible.
Yeah. I have to say this, I've been doing this for well over a decade, and I learn something every single day. It's amazing. So, with that, what are, some of the challenges the river still faces?
There are so many, and as much progress as we're making, there's still a lot of barriers. One of the things that we are looking at is the issue of stormwater, which is such a funny word, because when you say it's just like the rain that hits the ground and then flows into bodies of water, that sounds maybe very obvious, but it's a big concern because stormwater carries pollutants in it, unnatural pollutants that we're not used to and that the environment isn't used to absorbing and taking in. It can be very toxic and polluting. So figuring out ways to treat stormwater, which is only increasing as development increases. So that's only a challenge that's going to go up and up and up. I think that climate change and sea level rise is a huge issue, especially because, like you were saying, and you mentioned earlier, the Duwamish River is uniquely tidally influenced, and we get saltwater. The flows of the river change depending on if the tide's in or out, which is really cool and a really unique part of the river. But it also means that it's more susceptible to things like sea level rise and extreme climate events that we didn't used to see, and we're going to see more frequently going forward. And we see that affecting people already now. It's not a hypothetical. That's a thing that's happening right now.
Yeah. And I need to take a break and just say, this is Sharon Leishman, again, with the Duwamish Alive Coalition on Rainier Avenue Radio, introducing our new program with Alicia Kellogg, the Duwamish River Basin Steward. And I have to say this, many times people have referred to this river as the River of Hope. So with all this, what gives you hope for this river and this watershed?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I'm a resident of Seattle. I've been a resident of Seattle since 2004. I love that I get to do work on Seattle's only river. And when I look at what has been done before me, and then even just the fact that my position exists, that gives me hope. The people that I'm talking to, that I'm trying to work with, whether it's a jurisdiction or a nonprofit group or a community group, everyone's eager and everyone's willing, and everyone understands that there's barriers, but all of us just want to figure out a way to surpass it. I haven't encountered anyone yet who doesn't want to work towards making things better. And it's hard, even though there are so many things that I'd like to do, that I just keep hitting up against a wall and a wall and a wall and a wall. And it can be really discouraging. Sometimes it just takes a conversation with someone to really remember that things are possible, that there's a lot of energy, that I'm not alone, and that, we're all in this together. And there are a lot of people who have my back and who have the river's back.
And so what do you think individuals can do? Just the average resident that lives within this ecosystem.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a really good question. And I always hesitate.
There's a lot of us.
There's a lot of us. I always hesitate to put too much onus on the individual, because a lot of the problems that have been wrought are on a systematic level, on a scale that we often don't get to control. So, I don't want to make this sound like if we all change, then just our own habits, then everything's going to be better. It will be a lot better. But there's a lot of things we can do. A lot of things have to do with making sure that our stormwater, the stormwater that we are responsible for, is clean before it goes into the river. And sometimes that's as simple as picking up your dog poop. And that's as simple as washing your car at a facility that's going to capture all that water instead of just doing it on the street. There's a lot of things like, making sure your car is not dripping oil, things like that. If you have the time and the privilege and the ability, there's so many volunteer events. There's so many opportunities, including with Duwamish Alive twice a year. A lot of ways to get involved in that way. And there are a lot of ways to get involved that are, maybe you want to go plant a plant, maybe you want to go pick up some trash. And there are opportunities to even go out and get a kayak for free. It's not something you have to pay for with the River Access Paddle Program. So I think finding ways to reduce the negative footprint that we have, finding ways to give back however possible. And maybe that's even just talking to someone. It doesn't have to be you giving your time and your labor. And then also educating yourself and learning more and continuing to listen to this radio program.
Well, there you go. So I do, I agree with you. I think part of this is that the success that has been shown over the long term has been because of the collaborativeness between a lot of the government entities, but also the nonprofits. And it's been really driven by people like just the average people who really love this river. And I'm always inspired when I hear these stories about, what one individual can do, even if it starts with like, let's just go pick up some trash. So we're all part of this ecosystem, and it, you know, it's come a long way, baby, as they say, but it's got a long way to go.
Absolutely.
And on another program, we'll talk about the Superfund, because that always gets a lot of questions, but that's a show in and of itself. So I do want to kind of wrap up and ask you, do you have a favorite spot you can suggest listeners to go out to, given that we do have a river and it is getting really hot? And, is there a favorite spot of yours?
Yeah. First of all, I don't want to say it's my favorite. It's like my children. I can't.
It's like, I have to say, it's whichever spot I visited last.
That sounds right.
Or going to visit. That's even more.
Absolutely. I think one of the sites that I often like to talk about, though, is Duwamish Gardens. And that's a site, any of the sites that I've talked about today, you can just Google them and they'll show up on a map. But Duwamish Gardens is a city of Tukwila site. A lot of people don't think about it, but it's a really beautiful site. There's a kayak launch. It's just kind of a hidden gem, I think. And everyone tends to mention kind of these like larger footprint projects, but it was done kind of, when projects were just starting to get going before 2020, and you can see some of the mature growth, and it's just really cool. It's right by the light rail, so it can get a little loud, but especially if you have some kind of watercraft like a boat or a stand-up paddleboard, it's a good spot to know of.
It is a great place to put into the river for kayaking, canoeing, paddleboarding. And I would say if you're able to do that and go down, and there's a lot of places down lower in the river that you can get out. It's special. I will say, look at the tide charts. Because you do not want to be paddling against the tide. It is. But the artwork, the artwork that has been incorporated and how it honors the Duwamish people, I agree with you. It's an amazing little gem. But I'll tell you my amazing little gem, just because I was just there, is Codica Park. And again, that's not that far from Duwamish Gardens, but it's got a lovely little kind of shelter that's an homage to the fact that it was a dairy farm for the Codica family. And it's got this beautiful canopied walk down to the river. And it's one of the few areas, that you can actually get to the river. And it has a beautiful sandy little beach that you see kids playing. Well, you can actually build sand castles at low tide. So anyway, so we hope you all get out to the river and explore it and have a good time. This is Sharon Leishman with Duwamish Alive Coalition on Rainier Avenue Radio. And thank you so much to Alicia, who has joined us today.
Thanks for having me.